Many years ago, right at the beginning of my career, I was exposed to the work of Werner Erhard. And during my time being involved in Werner Erhard's programs and indeed working for Werner Erhard Associates in London, I came across this model. Truth be told, I can't remember if the way I do this model now is the way I first originally learned it. I've taught it for close on 36 years now, so I've added all sorts of ideas to it. And what interests me about it in the light of the thinking environment is the insight that this model gives us to the ways in which limiting assumptions get formulated by us during the course of our lives and become lived by us as true. And it's through looking at the work that we do in the thinking environment with limiting assumptions and incisive questions through the lens of this model that I think we can also learn to develop some compassion for ourselves and for the human being that created the untrue limiting assumption in the first place, and have maybe possibly spent much of our lives living from that untrue limiting assumption. We know, don't we, from the work that we do in thinking sessions, that we can liberate ourselves from those assumptions. But I think the work of this model gives us some insight into how they get put together in the first place and why. And there's many other topics that we can look at through the lens of this model as well. I think particularly those of having courageous conversations to resolve conflict as well. So I'd like to take you through the model, and then we'll look at different ways in which we can apply it and in which we can weave it together with the work of the thinking environment. So the way in which life happens for those of us that we would call human beings is in the present moment. So this is actually where life happens. It happens in the present. And if you think about life happening in the present moment, it happens literally in moments of now. So now, 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 now. And if you think about those moments of now as containing data, in other words, things that are happening. So if we apply what I'm talking about to this present moment, then what we've got is a moment of now in which there's a person at a flip chart and she's making X's in a circle on the flip chart and she's talking into a camera. So all of that is data. It's interesting because when I talk about this model, I talk about data as what would the video camera capture? So this is exactly what's happening right now. The video camera is capturing a woman in an orange top standing at a flip chart with 3 circles drawn on the page and the word present written above one of them, which is now populated by a series of crosses. That's life happening in the present moment, filled with events that are happening. Those of you that are watching this video don't know this, but as I'm filming this, there's wind blowing outside, and so there's leaves moving on the tree, and the sun is coming and going in between clouds. All of that is data. We can look at it, we can observe it. Now, for us as human beings, though, life also happens in a different domain, simultaneously to this one. In fact, so simultaneously that we often collapse these two domains. And that's where assumptions get established and start to colour the way in which we see life as it's happening. So I'll talk you through it. Something happens in the present moment, and the minute it happens, we also have an interpretation about what's happening. So I can look out the window and I can see that there are clouds, and I can see that the wind is blowing, and I can see maybe that the leaves are moving more vigorously than they were, say, 30 minutes ago, and I can have an interpretation that there's weather coming in. And I can maybe have an interpretation that the weather that's coming in is not good weather, that bad weather is on its way. All of that is an interpretation about what I'm observing in a moment of now. Now, If I happened to be getting married later on this evening, there would be a whole pile of additional interpretations that would be adding to what I'm observing in the present moment. So I'd be looking out the window, I'd be seeing that the trees and the leaves on the trees are beginning to sway more vigorously. There's weather coming in. Why does this always happen to me? Life's not fair. All sorts of other interpretations might start to emerge as a result of what I'm observing, the data that I'm observing outside the window. And depending on what's happening in these interpretations, they are going to shape the way I start seeing the next moment of now. So those interpretations that we have about what's happening actually act almost like a lens, a filter through which we see life. And the filter through which we're seeing life shapes what we start to see. So it becomes, the interpretation becomes data for us. So I stop going, okay, well, the wind is blowing and the leaves are blowing more vigorously on the trees, but the clouds are moving past and who knows, it might clear up. Instead, because I've also got this element of threat present about what I'm seeing, because I've got an important event coming up and I don't want there to be weather coming in, the threat seems to solidify the interpretation that I've got. And I think this is one of the things that's interesting to start to note about this is when there's an element of threat involved, we know now, don't we, that we've got this thing called negativity bias, and we move in the direction of a negative interpretation about that threat. It's almost part of our survival mechanism. If I think about the worst case scenario and I prepare for that, then maybe I'll be able to survive the threat. So instead of being able to see that actually, if I were to just turn my head slightly that way, I would see that the wind is blowing the clouds away and actually it's bright and sunny on the other side. But it's almost as if the glasses become like, what are those things that horses have on either side of their head that stop them from being able to see the threat or the danger, and it keeps the horse calm. Can't think of the word. Never mind. You know the point I'm making. Okay, so here what starts to happen is that we start to relate to bad weather's coming, my event's going to be ruined, this always happens to me, I can never get what I want. And we start relating to that not like it's an interpretation, but as if it's data. When I first learned this model, what I discovered is the only way that you can break the grip of what becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy is by questioning the interpretation. Now, that's easier said than done, because one of the things that we have to contend with all the time as human beings is we love being right. We fall into the habit, the temptation to see life as we see it, not as it is, and to be convinced that the way in which we see it is the way that it is. So this is what we call self-fulfilling prophecies, and as you work with this model, what you'll start to see is that because your interpretation is shaping the way you're seeing life and the way you're being with life, you tend to get more evidence for your interpretation and you end up being stuck. This is the work that we do in a thinking session when we encounter the untrue limiting assumptions that are stopping us from having life be the way we want it to be. These come from our past. How else would I be able to say, this always happens to me, things never go my way, life is unfair, if I wasn't drawing on past experiences to produce those assumptions in the first place? So what we do is we collapse the past and the present, and we start relating to the present moment as if it's a continuation of the past. If you stop and think about it for a moment, the present moment can never be a continuation of the past. The present moment has never happened. It's brand new. In every single moment, life is brand new. But that's not how we live it as human beings. How many times do we say to ourselves, here we go again? There isn't any such thing as again in actual fact. There's no such thing as repetition in actual fact. It can feel repetitious, but that doesn't mean that it is, because in actual fact, everything is brand new in every moment. So enter this circle, which is the future. And this is where the work of the freedom model starts to overlap with the work that we do in thinking sessions when we're surfacing and removing untrue limiting assumptions. Because in a thinking session, what the thinker has done is they've created a future that they want to accomplish. We refer to it in the thinking session as a further goal or a further outcome for the session. The question that they will have answered is, the thinking partner would have said, we've got some time left in the session. What more, if anything, would you like to accomplish with that time? And the thinker says, by the end of this session, i.e. into the future of my session, I want to be able to, and then they end that sentence with the preferred outcome or the future outcome that they're wanting to accomplish. And what we do in a thinking session is we start to ask, well, what are you assuming? Assumptions always come from the past. What are you assuming that is stopping you from that vision, that outcome that you want to accomplish? And that's where we start to surface and remove the untrue limiting assumptions. And when we find the one that we see is untrue and we can see that it's untrue, what we do then instead is we create a liberating alternative. And when we create a liberating alternative, what we're effectively doing is we're creating a new pair of glasses. What we're saying to ourselves is, well, if I knew that no matter what the weather does, I can create a day for myself that will be full of love and joy, it changes how we're being towards the weather that we're seeing outside the window. And then that gives us more possibility to be able to access the future that it is that we're wanting to create.